Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's town hall and community conversation on this very important topic facing our schools, the reopening, the coronavirus, and social justice. My name is Kathy Goodacre, and I'm the CEO for the CTE Foundation, Career Technical Education Foundation. Briefly, for those of you who don't know us, the CTE Foundation is an independent nonprofit organization that partners with schools to provide quality, career-connected learning for local students to support the development of our future workforce. This includes connecting our students to careers in construction, agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and health careers. The foundation provides direct funding support to local schools and develops important partnerships that link employers with our educators to create opportunities for students to see a connection to their classroom learning and the real world. The CTE Foundation is very honored to be co-hosting this event with our partners and co-host. I want to first acknowledge California State Senator Mike McGuire and his team for all the time, effort, and guidance they've provided making this evening's event possible. I especially want to acknowledge Senator McGuire for his personal and long-standing commitment to kids and education here in Sonoma County, and for championing for education at the state level. A quick shout out to our partner organization, Cradle to Career Sonoma County, and their members. Cradle to Career is a county-wide organization made up of a broad representation of community leaders who are collectively working together to ensure all our students prepared for success throughout the education pipeline and are able to reach their full potential throughout every stage of life. We're grateful and honored to have our esteemed panel here tonight to address the many concerns and questions we know you all have as we face and approach this coming school year. Thank you to State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and County Superintendent, Dr. Stephen Herrington, for being here this evening. We have more than 1,300 people registered for this webinar, with hundreds more following on Facebook Live. It is clear everyone is beginning to understand that the health of our education system is fundamental to a thriving economy and community. We also know and understand that the level of uncertainty created by this pandemic is causing a great deal of stress and anxiety amongst our educators, our students, and our parents. There is no doubt that the topic of reopening schools and distance learning is a top priority for us all. I want to assure you that each of the representatives in this town hall tonight only have the best interest in mind for the health, well-being, and the futures for our local students. With over 1,000 participants and a limited time frame to work in, we certainly will not be able to address everyone's concerns and questions this evening, but we will do our best to hit on the common themes and the most pressing issues. And please know that topics and questions that we're not able to address tonight will help inform us as we plan future events in town halls. So we encourage you to continue to post your questions, and we'll be able to capture those for a later time. Again, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us tonight, for submitting all the questions that you have in advance. And to get on with tonight's program, we're going to begin with a brief overview from each of the superintendents, addressing the reopening and distance learning, budget updates, and equity inclusion. This will be followed by a question and answer session. So now I'm going to hand it off to our own Senator McGuire, who will introduce our first panelist.
Hey, well, good evening, Kathy, and thank you so much. Kathy Goodacre has been putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into tonight's event. We want to say thank you so much, and of course, for the partnership of the CTE Foundation for bringing us together tonight. We have been grateful to partner with you on this critical community conversation. This evening, you are going to hear, as you just heard from the California Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and the Sonoma County Superintendent of Schools, Steve Herrington. But before we get into the town hall, I'd like to be able to make a few brief opening remarks. The impacts of the coronavirus, the impacts that it's had on our nation, the Golden State, and our local communities, it runs deep. Lives have been upended due to the public health impacts of this pandemic and the economic fallout that has taken hold. The impact the coronavirus has had on public education in this state is simply, it's unprecedented. And it's been incredibly stressful for all involved, from teachers teaching remotely for the first time in their career, to parents educating their kids in their living rooms, and students trying to find connectivity on their Chromebooks. I want to be candid this evening. We are most likely in the scenario, the virus ebbing and flowing like we're seeing right now in a spike, for another 12 months at least. The goal of tonight, give as many solid answers as possible. But if we're being honest, there won't be any one-size-fits-all approaches in the coming months when it comes to K-12 public education. Going back to school for many students may mean distance learning for the first month or two of school, and then reevaluating due to the high virus numbers in their district's community. Some districts may advance a hybrid classroom distance learning format. And in some small rural communities who don't have a spike in virus cases, they could go back to the classroom full time. Again, we're living in unprecedented times, and we're gonna get through this though. I'm a firm believer in that. Sonoma County, we've always gotten through big disasters before, no matter how big the fire or the flood. This county and the people who call it home are full of grit, they're resilient, and we step up when times are tough. And this will be no different. So for tonight, we have the opportunity to hear our leaders, to hear from our leaders in education at the state and county levels. They're going to get into the details of what to expect in the coming weeks and months, and what we can all do to plan for education in the long term. We'll also talk about achieving social justice and equity in our state's classrooms, along with addressing the digital divide and district consolidation. But the most important part of tonight is the conversation with you, the nearly 1,000 strong who are on Zoom and on Facebook. We're going to spend as much time possible answering your questions this evening. So without any further delay, let's get right into it. We're now going to turn it over to Kathy Goodacre to be able to introduce Dr. Steve Herrington, the Sonoma County Superintendent of Schools, and then we'll hear from the State Superintendent, Tony Thurmond. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Senator. It is my honor to introduce our County Superintendent, Dr. Stephen Herrington, who has been such a great partner with the County Office of Education in working with our organization, the CTE Foundation. Dr. Stephen Herrington was elected as Sonoma County Superintendent of Schools in 2011 and is now serving his third term in this role. He is a native Californian who began his career as a history teacher. Previously, he served as superintendent for 3 Northern California school districts, gaining experience in rural, suburban, and urban settings. The county superintendent is elected by the voters and acts as a liaison for local districts and the state. Superintendent Herrington provides leadership and support for the county's 40 school districts representing more than 68,000 students. Dr. Herrington, thank you again for being here tonight. And can you please give us a brief overview of what's happening in Sonoma County schools?
Thank you, Kathy. And Mike, I'd like to thank you as well. And I know Tony will be joining us shortly. For Sonoma County schools, it is really appreciated its partnership with the CTE Foundation. And for the public, they need to know that through the foundation, the CTE has provided 132 new sections for students in programs and instruction. And through our own county office, we've added 120 teaching candidate credentials in the area of career technical education. But to deal with the issue at hand, what are we doing right now with public schools? What we're dealing with is the implementation of Senate Bill 98. Senate Bill 98, and State Senator McGuire can address this later, is the funding bill for schools for this year. And the intent of the legislation was that schools should open and move towards in-person instruction based on some qualifying criteria. And so what the districts have been doing since probably May, they've been outlining the options under that bill to see what they can accomplish. The first thing that had to be done was that local districts needed to work with the county health officer. Well, there are 40 school districts. So that makes it a challenge for her to work with the 40 school districts. So she works through the county superintendent, and we had a subcommittee of superintendents that worked with her to develop what we call the roadmap to reopening schools in Sonoma County. That roadmap outlines the health guidance for each district to consider in developing their plan. And under SB 98, schools were to develop a local plan that addressed moving towards in-person instruction. That plan has several options in it because no one wants schools to take a risk at hand for their students or their teachers. So the plan, as most of the districts have developed, offers distance learning as one option. It offers a blended model, which is called a hybrid, some days on, some days with distance learning, so that you have small cohorts for students. And even within our plan, our county health officer has provided for a transition to when you can move towards a full instruction. Now, it's a multifaceted plan, and we have advised consistently to the districts to be flexible with their planning and to be ready to go forward, and you may have to go backward. So those are the things we're looking at in the plan. But the 40 superintendents, or 38 actually, for superintendents, and the 200 school board members care deeply about their community and their constituents. So they will be deciding, one, which plan to finalize their plan, and two, what the conditions will be under which they will open. As Senator McGuire said, the small rurals can probably open. They have space, availability, where they could do more small cohort instructions. The more suburban urbans will probably have to choose either a blended model or a distance learning model. Over the next couple of weeks, that's the decision making that's going to occur. Santa Rosa City Schools has got their plan pretty well mapped out. Sebastopol has their plan pretty well mapped out. Petaluma City Schools. But some others are coming on the first week in August. You'll see Windsor, Healdsburg, they will be bringing their plans forward. But that gives you the tempo of where the districts are. They're each rolling out their plan. They're negotiating the impacts and effects of those plans with their employee groups. And so that's where we are right now, on the threshold of deciding, one, approve your plan, two, which option will you choose?
Dr. Herrington, thank you so much. We are so grateful for your hard work in these challenging times. And I got to say, Steve Herrington has had a heck of a tenure as superintendent of schools here in Sonoma County, working through some of the largest wildland fires in our state's history and power shutoffs. We're grateful for your service and appreciate your time here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Superintendent Herrington will be on momentarily. With anything right now, it's very fluid, and he is trying to get out of the meeting even as we speak. He'll be joining us momentarily, and we're going to get a full briefing from Superintendent Thurmond in just a few moments. So what we'd like to be able to do, we have literally hundreds of questions from each and every one of you this evening. We want to say thank you, and the questions are continuing to come in. If you'd like to be able to submit your question to both Superintendent Herrington and Superintendent Thurmond, there are two ways to be able to work with us tonight. Please submit your comments and your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you're on Zoom. If you're the hundreds of folks that are currently watching us on the CTE Foundation Facebook page, please submit your questions and comments via the Facebook live feed. We have individuals who are going to be monitoring that feed and submitting those questions momentarily. So let's get right into it. Superintendent Herrington and Kathy Goodacre, we're going to be going to our questions and answers and talking about your comments. Let's go to the first question. And again, want to say thank you to each and every one of you who have submitted. This first question is coming to us from Santa Rosa. Steve and Holly, thank you so much for coming into us via the CTE Facebook page. Here's what Steve and Holly has for Superintendent Herrington. Bottom line, Superintendent Herrington, should parents prepare for distance learning this fall now that Santa Rosa City schools have made their announcement that they're going to start the school year in distance learning mode? What should other Sonoma County school districts do now?
Well, once again, we have to respect local control, and so we will honor the wishes of each local district. But I think most districts are going to go in cautiously. When you look at the criteria that the health department looks at when they are advising us, is they look at the rate of activity within the exposure field. They look at the availability of hospital beds and new enrollees. They look at all those things. Most of that will be available, but we have another issue to deal with locally. We don't have all our personal protective equipment, and that's another issue districts need to have prepared to open school. So each district will be looking at that. I believe the majority of the suburban urban districts will choose distance learning, but those board meetings have not yet been are not yet set for some districts. So I do not want to preempt or provide an answer for a district that hasn't yet made its decision. It's a deliberative process, but the majority of districts will probably go distance learning, especially at the secondary level, because it's taking large student populations and putting them into small cohorts is a very difficult task, and that is the challenge they face. And they would probably be able to say they cannot meet the county health guidance that's in our roadmap to recovery to reopening schools.
Thank you so much. And again, we welcome everyone on Zoom and Facebook Live here tonight. We're talking with Dr. Herrington, the Sonoma County Superintendent of Schools, and joining us shortly will be the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. We're going to go to one additional question that came in via email prior to the big town hall tonight. Then I'm going to turn it over after this question to Kathy Goodacre. This next question comes in from Odin. Odin, Mr. Superintendent asks, will there be a move to ensure that staff and faculty at our public schools are wearing masks in a mandatory fashion? Superintendent, the floor is yours.
The guidance says that faculty, adults, all adults on campus need to wear masks, as well as now the governor has modified that to say all students and faculty will be wearing masks on campus. So that mask mandatory ruling, and I think the state superintendent will reinforce it, was in their first guidance that masks are mandatory for school settings. I think people need to realize that visitors on campuses will be restricted. Once again, exposure, you have to look at the exposure rate. So those things will happen. Masks will be a mandatory practice, as well as restrictions to access on campus.
Thank you, Superintendent. Kathy Goodacre, CTE Foundation, let's turn it back to you for a few questions for the Superintendent of Schools, Sonoma County.
Great, thank you, Senator. Getting back to the distance learning question and concern, many have asked this, but specifically from Leslie in Santa Rosa. Superintendent Herrington, how will distance learning be improved this fall based on the experiences of teachers and students had in the spring?
Well, I think that's a good question, because remember, we made that decision March 13th, Friday the 13th, and we had to move quickly and make a decision on to go to distance learning under the state shelter-in-place order. We weren't all prepared for that, and we had to develop it. From that experience, parents spoke up, advocacy groups, PTA, social advocacy groups for students of disability, and they all spoke up and said it isn't equitably being applied and instituted. Therefore, under Senate Bill 98, we have a set of structured guidelines for implementing distance learning, the number of instructional minutes, and there is to be in-person instruction from the teacher within those guidelines. And each board, if they go to distance learning, has to meet the prerequisite minutes. They have to meet the prerequisite interaction between the teacher and the student. There's a prerequisite for attendance and accountability of attendance. And there's a prerequisite that you provide additional services to your underrepresented populations and for EL, English language learners, special education students. All of that has now been mapped out. Remember, on March 13th, 2019, or that's in 2020, excuse me, we jumped right into this without any sets of standards. Legislation has now been adopted. They added 120 sections to the education code to address these concerns.
Can I do a follow-up on that really quick? I know I saw State Superintendent Thurmond earlier today address the resources for our teachers and educators around distance learning. I'm wondering what, and we did have this question come in as well, what resources and support has been made available or will be made available to help the teachers implement around distance learning? Well,
I'm quite proud of the staff at the county office. We have a training component going forward in the last week of July, first 2 weeks of August. And I am offering teachers a stipend to participate in the program to learn and practice the strategies and implementation techniques for distance learning and how to engage students. We're also dealing with the social justice issue and the equity issues within the classroom. So this is a teacher enrolled program. They are getting a $500 stipend for a week of participation to learn the strategies. We have spent, staff at SCO have spent time setting up the training session. So I advise teachers that are listening to go to scoe.org to see if there's any more available seats. We've opened up an additional section because the demand has been so great from the teaching community.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. We want to make sure that you are getting your questions and comments coming in. Kathy Goodacre is going to be getting some of the questions coming in via Zoom, and thank you so much for submitting. We'll be getting to those in just a few moments. We're going to be getting the first batch of our Facebook Live questions coming in just a few moments. Again, if you have questions for the superintendent and you are on Zoom, hit the Q&A link. Kathy Goodacre is going to be asking those questions in just a few moments. If you'd like to be able to ask a question or leave a comment on Facebook Live, and you're on the CTE Foundation Facebook page, simply put it into the stream. We're monitoring, and we're going to get to those questions in just a bit. Let's go to another question, and this is in regards to teachers, Superintendent Herrington. A lot of teachers and classified staff, rightfully so, they're concerned and fearful about coming back to school when there is a significant surge in the virus numbers. So for example, the county has told us today, out of the 67 ICU beds available in Sonoma County hospitals, 61 of them are filled. So we're obviously seeing a spike in numbers at this present time. So what would you say to teachers who are fearful about coming back? Superintendent Herrington, the floor is yours.
Well, the anxiety is real. I mean, I've experienced it myself. The personal family loss of a family member on May the 1st. I lost a family member due to COVID-19. I had to deal with that reality. So I know it's a real angst that people have. But we are also have a professional responsibility to our community, and we are essential workers under the law. So we will be working with the community as we go forward. That's why I think starting out with the distance learning puts teachers at ease a little bit for protection and distance for students. But the criteria will be eventually to move back to some sort of cohort in program. So that's where we are currently. No. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that teachers have a right, classified staff have a right to be concerned related to this virus, which is why the distance learning is going to be advanced here in the beginning of school. Let's go to Bobby. Bobby is on Facebook Live tonight. Bobby asks, who will supply and pay for all the masks and cleaning supplies that will be needed for our schools? Superintendent, the floor is yours. Thanks, Bobby, for your question.
The personal protective equipment, the first 60 days, the Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Services, through the governor's office, is will provide supplies so schools can open. At the county office, we are the primary distributor. Those supplies are not just for public schools, they're for charters, and they will also be going out to the private schools in our county. We will coordinate that distribution. So that's part of the situation. Thereafter, districts will be part of a statewide pool purchasing agreement with the state to buy supplies. Now that means they get it at a more affordable rate, but that's out-of-pocket expense that is not subsidized unless we get the HEROES Act, or we could use our pre-existing CARES dollars if we haven't used them all up, because they have to be expended by December 31st. So districts have resources available, but they are temporary resources at this time.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. That's Superintendent Herrington, Sonoma County Schools Superintendent. Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful to have the State Superintendent of Schools, Tony Thurmond, on with us. Here's what we'd like to be able to do. The superintendent, as you can imagine, is incredibly busy. It is a challenging time for everyone. He's been in meetings. He is now on with us live here at the town hall. We're going to turn the floor over to Superintendent Thurmond to be able to give us a 5-minute briefing on all issues related to public schools, K-12 throughout the state. Then we're going to come back to your questions and comments. We're going to start back with Kathy Goodacre. She is getting a new batch of questions and comments from Zoom, but let's turn the floor over to our State Superintendent of Schools, Tony Thurmond. Thank him for his hard work on behalf of kids. The floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes, and welcome to the town hall.
Senator McGuire, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to join your distinguished panel. Thank you for the remarks from Dr. Herrington. I'll keep this brief. We know that this is a very challenging time for our entire state and our entire nation. The pandemic is worldwide, and we're seeing challenges across the board that require our attention. I'm grateful to our 1,000 school districts. They're all planning on how reopening schools might look. We know that being in school is important for the well-being of our students. We know that many of our citizens in the state need to work, but we also know that we've got to balance those needs against the needs for safety. And for the last month, we've seen an increase in spikes of cases all across the state. And the increase has occurred in a way that allows us to really think about how to move in an abundance of caution. We know that we have to put safety first. The California Department of Education has provided guidance on how to open. It envisions all kinds of scenarios about classrooms, how they're made up, and how many people would be in a classroom. As you heard from Superintendent Herrington, we've worked with the governor's office and many others to get the personal protective equipment out to more than 10,000 schools. And we're grateful to our partners at the county who helped to get those resources out. We're talking face masks, shields, hand sanitizers, thermometers. Because we know that part of this work that's important is taking temperatures before students and staff enter the campus. But even with all of this, we have to monitor what's happening with the incredible spike in cases all across our state. And so if schools were to open tomorrow, those conditions are such that most schools would have to open in distance learning, at least to begin the school year, and sort of in order to make sure that we have safety for all of our students. It's easier for us to monitor from distance learning and then work our way back to in-class instruction. But we also know there are some parts in the state and probably some parts in this county that have very few cases and actually will be able to open in-person instruction. And then many districts are looking to have a hybrid model where they open in distance learning, but they might actually consider creating a kind of childcare pod that has a small number of students supported by school district staff to help them in distance learning while their parents are at work. So we know there's a lot of different models being explored. We're working with the Department of Public Health, with the legislature, the governor's office, to make sure we get you all the personal protective equipment that you need. Safety is paramount. We got to make sure our kids are safe, and then take care of their social emotional learning needs. Many of you have worked with me on the counseling coalition that I've created to fill in the gaps to make sure that we can care for the counseling needs of our students. And of course, we've been working with partners from all over, including each of the county health officers, to make sure that the communication flows between superintendents and health officers to support all of our students. So let's continue to be monitoring. Let's continue to do all those things that we know that will keep us safe: face coverings, hand washing, maintaining physical distance. Senator McGuire, I appreciate you especially for joining the work that we're doing on the task force to close the digital divide. Through your work and other legislators, we've been able to get more computing devices for students, get more internet, reduced cost internet for families across the state. But we won't stop until we build the infrastructure to make sure that we have internet connectivity all throughout your district and all throughout the state. We know that there are big challenges there, but we're on it until we get it all done.
Now, Mr. Superintendent, we are so grateful, and again, making time this evening. The superintendent made some comments earlier today related to really not seeing a one-size-fits-all approach throughout California. So Superintendent, we were asking Superintendent Herrington earlier about Sonoma County, but give us your take. Is your opinion, is it better to be safe than sorry if we're seeing a significant spike in numbers, whether it's here in Sonoma County or LA, that districts should seriously consider distance learning to start the year? What's your opinion on that?
Thanks, Senator. You know, for most of our districts in the state, if school were to open tomorrow, I don't believe that it would be safe for us to open an in-person instruction. Simply put, we have to monitor the data in every community to make sure that students are safe. In some of our districts across the state, their rate of transmission of COVID virus is well above the metric that's considered safe. In some cases, 10% of cases. You know, many consider 5% sort of a number to monitor, but if you're at 10%, it's sending a signal that things are not safe. Yes, better safe than sorry. You know, we actually run 3 schools in the state that serve deaf and blind students. I'm so proud of those schools. They do incredible work. We're actually opening all 3 of those schools to begin the school year in distance learning out of an abundance of caution. We have students who come from 45 different counties in the state, and they live at school. And so that creates some real health challenges. And again, we would caution everybody to, monitor the conditions, but better safe than sorry, as you said, Senator.
Superintendent, thank you so much. We're going to go to another question for Superintendent Thurmond, and then we're going to turn it over to Superintendent Herrington. And again, Superintendent Thurmond, the State Superintendent of Schools, has been incredibly active here in Sonoma County and the North Bay. We're grateful. He is a Bay Area guy as well, and we are so appreciative of his hard work. So let's talk about substitute teachers, Mr. Superintendent. There's a lot of concern that there may not be enough substitute teachers, and let's be honest, there wasn't enough substitute teachers in the good times, if you will. So talk about that and contingency planning that districts should be looking at. We'll then turn it over to Superintendent Herrington to also provide his local perspective. Superintendent Thurmond.
Yeah, as you said, Senator, we've always struggled with having sufficient numbers of substitute teachers. We have a teacher shortage in the state and in this country that is exacerbated by the current conditions that we're seeing with the pandemic. The hybrid model that I described really does depend on having substitute teachers or classified staff or others who can help. Meaning if a district is going to have distance learning, but create some kind of a childcare pod where parents can have their kids be in a school environment and doing distance learning, that really does require having access to substitutes. It's different in every county. It's different in every district, the availability of substitutes. As we continue our efforts around teacher recruitment and retention, we're going to have to give serious consideration to how we recruit and support substitutes and help them become the workforce of tomorrow, because we don't have enough teachers as it is. And we have classified staff who become teachers. We have great training programs there. We need to do the same to build our teacher workforce and build our substitute pool as well.
Thank you so much. That's Superintendent Thurmond, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're now going to go to Superintendent Herrington. He's been dealing with this on a local level. Again, Superintendent Herrington, challenges before the pandemic. Talk about substitutes, how it's going to work. Then we're going to turn it over to Kathy Goodacre to go to our Zoom questions and comments. Superintendent Herrington, if you don't mind taking yourself off of mute, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. First of all, we were short substitutes last year. That hasn't changed. And we will probably have a greater shortage now, because remember, many of our substitutes are retirees who keep themselves active by becoming substitute teachers, but they're also in that high risk group. And so they won't be as abundant as we've had in the past. The second thing is, if a school district goes to a cohort model, they will probably want to have a cadre of their own substitutes so that they're not exposing children to multiple individuals through a rotation of subs. So that's going to be even more restrictive on the local district to try to develop a cadre of subs that they can call on. But that once again divides up the resources that we have. We are going to be in a very big problem as it relates to subs. And remember, they don't all have the health and welfare benefits that a teacher does. So there's a concern factor there.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Herrington. We're now going to turn it over to Kathy Goodacre, CEO of the CTE Foundation. She's going to be going to some of our Zoom questions and comments. Kathy.
Great, thank you, Senator. And this question may be addressed by either State Superintendent or Dr. Herrington. James is asking about something that is near and dear to my heart, career technical education. And especially now that we are looking more and more like distance learning is going to be a bigger reality for more of our schools and our students. And what considerations or what might be put in place, what resources and support will there be for our educators and our students who are relying on that hands-on education in their shop classes or even in other programs like art in the labs? So I will ask, if I may, State Superintendent, if you have a response to that.
Thank you, Kathy. You know, we started this year working to expand funding in the state budget for programs like career technical education. And over the course of the last few years, Senator McGuire and myself and others, when I was in the legislature, we increased the amount of funding for career technical education dramatically. However, that funding has not kept pace over the years. We know that Career Technical Education is an incredible program that supports learning on so many levels. And so given the impacts to our economy because of the impacts of COVID-19, important programs like Career Technical Education have seen an adverse impact on the funding that's available for the program. As we get through these next 2 years, we're going to have to really make another serious investment in CTE. And the reason I say these next 2 years is because we're looking at a budget, and the senator can speak to it better than I can. We're looking at a financial picture that says that over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to experience one of the more difficult, fiscal pictures in our state. We need the HEROES Act, as Dr. Herrington talked about. We also have some measures on the November ballot that would actually create more revenue for schools, billions in revenue. And it would actually protect homeowners and seniors and small businesses and agricultural businesses. And so these opportunities will allow us to invest in more CTE programs. We are lucky to have champions like Superintendent Herrington. I'm honored that he joined my statewide superintendent's advisory council. That means he gets to boss me around all the time, but it means that he's also telling me important things that we need to know from the standpoint of Sonoma County, but he takes it above and beyond. His view is broad, and I know that there's some unique things happening in Sonoma County around CTE. If I may, I might just get it to Dr. Herrington to offer those examples.
Well, first of all, I want to thank once again the CTE Foundation, which I think Mike was instigator in, as well as Tony Crabb and others, basically started in 2013. In that time period, we've added 132 additional sections of career technical education to our program curriculum within this county. In 2015, the county's Maker Lab and the Maker Credential Program, which was developed with Sonoma State as a partner, was recognized by the Obama White House. And we were invited back to be recognized at the Maker Fair that they hosted at the county, at the White House, the federal level. We've also secured a K-12 Strong Workforce Grant on behalf of 8 school districts in our county to expand their areas. That was the last big financial resource we had from the state level, because both of you have addressed the fact that because revenue is going to be tight, the expansion of these programs will be tight. But I also want to point out that through our own County Office of Education, we operate the North Coast School of Education. And it is a teacher credentialing program for professionals who have a BA, who are experts in the field of art or science or technical engineering, and they can get their CTE credential through the program. We've added 120 candidates into that credential program locally. So we are developing our own resources, we're growing our own, but we are going to be tight financially for expansion, and that will be the challenge ahead.
Thank you so much to both of our superintendents. We are getting so many questions. Superintendent Thurmond, Superintendent Herrington coming in. Let's keep it going. We're starting to take the themes of questions. We're getting a lot of questions, Superintendent Herrington, about if a school employee tests positive for the coronavirus, what will the protocols be? How does that work? Will all the students have to quarantine themselves? What say you?
Okay. First of all, we have spent the last week and a half working with county health officers, the health officer, on developing the protocol within the county. We sent out the draft document today to the local districts. In it, it talks about notification process, it talks about the tracing process, and etc. What will happen is, and it may be that you have a student who tests positive, there will be a notification process that goes through tracing, and the students or the teacher involved in that classroom are noticed. They may be put on quarantine, or they may be on 14-day quarantine, that class. That doesn't mean you close the school down. It doesn't mean you stop the process. But once again, we talk about our Southern California partners who are facing double-digit positivity rates. In Sonoma County, we are at 3%. That's a very good rate to be at. But we are experiencing a surge right now, so we are cautious. So we do not wish to see that positivity rate grow out of bounds. So those are the things we look at. But what I want to say to you is that we know that we have a protocol in place that we need to follow. It's being developed right now in Spanish, so our Spanish speakers will have it as well. And districts will be able to disseminate that to all their parents, what's supposed to happen in the home, and what's supposed to happen in the school, and what's supposed to happen at the health department. And that's gone through 2 vettings, one with our own legal counsel and one with county counsel, just to make sure that the process steps are clearly articulated.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Herrington. We're now going to go to Superintendent Thurmond. And again, so grateful that Mr. Thurmond is with us. He's the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Let's talk about special education, if it's all right, Mr. Thurmond. This has been a priority for you, sir, and especially individual education plans. Talk about your thoughts for those students who may need an individual education plan. What's the thought on behalf of the state? Then we'll turn it over to Superintendent Herrington from Sonoma County. Superintendent Thurmond.
Senator, you know, our office, the California Department of Education, provided probably 40 different webinars from the time that we went into distance learning to really support educators and families and parents and students. And the most frequently articulated topic was serving students in special education. You know, sadly, some districts just chose not to provide any services during distance learning. I think they had questions about whether or not the law allowed it. In fact, the law does allow it. And the Federal Department of Education said that you can provide special education by distance and remote learning. Now, I get that's difficult, and that's different than what we've ever seen before. And it's been hard. But the reality is that when students see their teacher, and they have contact with their teacher, that is an important moment for them. And when a student has contact with the person who is their one-to-one aide, that is also an important moment. You can do great things to support our students. And so we encourage districts to lean in, to continue to provide support. And as we look at the possibility of many schools opening in distance learning again, as we enter the fall, we know that we've got to give more guidance to our school districts on how distance learning happens. Let's face it, the reality is that California, like the rest of the nation, went into distance learning overnight, literally overnight. And it was the right thing to do to keep everyone safe. And I applaud students and parents and educators for their resilience. But it's been bumpy along the way. And we know that there's been disparities for many, including students with disabilities. There have been disparities for students who are English learners. There have been disparities for African-American students and low-income students. And even though in California, we were able to take care of basic needs and provide meals at 5,000 school sites. I know there's so many volunteers in Sonoma County, many of you who've helped to deliver those meals. You know, clearly there's been disparity. And so our office is going to be releasing some additional guidance that will really help districts so that there's continuity from classroom to classroom. So there's consistency in what's provided. We'll continue to provide that distance learning. We'll work with great leaders like Dr. Herrington and local school district leaders to make sure there's more training for our educators. Make sure they have the software and the equipment to provide distance learning, in particular for our students with special needs. And then the most important thing, I would say an important connector, and that's parent engagement. We've got to be able to talk to our families. We got to be able to make ourselves accessible to them. We worked with a lot of groups that surveyed families that felt like the students with disabilities weren't served well. One of their biggest complaints was they couldn't get through to anybody at a local school. And sometimes families would be told things like, well, just email us. Let's face it, we have a lot of families who don't have access to email. They have one device where everyone in the family might have a cell phone. And so we have to have an old-fashioned person who's at the other end of the phone line to take a call to make sure there are adjustments that need to get made in the services for our students with disabilities. Some of the school district is handling that.
Superintendent Thurmond, thank you so much. I want to do a quick time check and ask Superintendent Thurmond, Superintendent Herrington, we have a lot of questions coming in. Gentlemen, would it be all right with you if we extend this by about another 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes? Would that be all right? We got this.
With me.
Hey, thank you. We got the thumbs up from Superintendent Thurmond. Thank you. And a thumbs up for Superintendent Herrington. Superintendent Herrington, quickly, would you mind touching on the IEP issue for special ed students? Quickly, 60 seconds, and we're going to go over to Kathy Goodacre for our next question. It's
hard for me to be concise in 60 seconds, but I'll try, Mike. first of all, I wish to commend Marin County. They did the pilot program for special ed with running the summer school extended year. From that model, we can open classes for special ed in some of our at-risk group populations. But it's going to be done on some districts, and there will be spacing issues and equipment issues. But we are running the IEPs, and most of our districts through our local SELPA has monitored that to make sure that the IEPs have been active and that they were being followed through at the local level. And we've encouraged parents, if they didn't get support, to go through the SELPA to make sure that there was a connectivity between the district and the parent. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn the floor over to Kathy Goodacre. Kathy?
Great, thank you. State Superintendent, you touched on something that we are hearing a lot about, and that is about parent engagement and support. And in particular, our working families who are just super stressed out about the idea of going back into distance learning and how to support their students. One, when they have to work and they can't afford to be at home and supporting those students, but also not feeling like they have the tools and resources to do essentially what feels like homeschooling. So are there any supports or guidelines that might be coming from the CTE or even out of the County Office of Education that might help support those parents around how to provide this tutoring and teaching with their students?
Thanks for the question, Kathy. I'm having flashbacks from my own experience, my two teenagers, and just how difficult it is. And really want to commend our families, the way they persevered, trying to help your own children while you're, holding down a job and dealing with all the impacts of the pandemic. It really is a challenge. We heard directly from parents, and they sent us notes, and they said that this is just too hard. How do I do this? And so we created what we call a virtual support circle for parents, where we brought on parents to talk about, we work with the PTA. You all have a great PTA leadership in Sonoma County and great PTAs all across your county. We work with the PTA to really, have parents talk to other parents about ways to brought on the state surgeon general, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's an expert in dealing with stress. And she really talked about the message that we wanted to put out to parents was to do your best. And that because you're in distance learning, that means your first priority is handle the safety of children. Secondly, to deal with the emotional support that they need. And that's our responsibility, to provide additional support. Created this task force of school social workers, school psychologists, school counselors who are all together triaging, provide additional support. A lot of our kids didn't even check in to distance learning in the first place because their family is probably scrambling for basic needs. And so as we potentially enter into distance learning again, we're going to have folks who do outreach. There has to be attendance. There has to be support. And we have to take a page out of what Senator McGuire helped create. In our digital divide task force, we heard that families that wanted to get access to the lower cost internet would sometimes call a number and nobody would answer it. And so we required the center to make this happen. We required each of the internet service providers to provide a designated staff person who would be available, a liaison, and take those calls from parents when they call. Many of them are bilingual, so that we could provide to our families. Schools are going to have the same thing, and we have to make sure that we continue to provide our support to our parents. And some districts are actually thinking about building a hybrid model. They'll open in distance learning, and they'll create these small child care pods that are specifically geared towards parents who have to, so that their children will be in distance learning with adults, either a substitute or a classified staff.
Looks like we may have just lost the superintendent's connection. We'll be working with his tech team to be able to come back here momentarily. Let's go to our next question. Superintendent Herrington, a lot of questions about fall sports. I know this is a rite of passage for fall. A lot of folks love football here in Sonoma County. Looking into your crystal ball, Superintendent Herrington, what do you think about fall sports?
Well, if you look at the county roadmap, the health guide says contact sports should be restricted. And that's what's in our county health guide and our road to county reopening. Also, Cal OSHA will be coming out shortly at the state level as it addresses sports and the restrictions on sports, a contact sport versus a non-contact sport. So as it relates to those issues, those sports that have direct contact, body-to-body contact, those, football, wrestling, those sports are probably going to be tabled. And what you might see might be tennis, you might see golf, but you won't see the regular contact sports being offered in the menu. The other thing people have to look at is choir. We have to look at the whole different way of teaching music and looking how that will work. So it's not just sports. The arts are going to have to adapt. And so that's what we're looking at. Flexibility of instruction, more outside instruction where possible for those things like a band or so on and distance you could do. But those type of things are being looked at as much as possible to keep those electives and those extra athletic activities available to students. But once again, you have to be back on a campus for some of these activities. And
Right.
so that's going to be the restriction. As long as we're on distance learning, you have no school for sports.
All right, thank you so much, and appreciate the blunt talk, Superintendent. I know this is not an easy subject for yourself and so many, because sports really is so important to so many students and families, so we appreciate that. We're going to be getting Superintendent Thurmond back on in just a bit. We're getting a lot of questions, Kathy, on the digital divide and students unable to access broadband. We're going to be talking to him about that in just a few moments, but let's turn it over to Kathy Goodacre. She has been working with a lot of the questions coming in on Zoom tonight. Kathy, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, I just want to ask Dr. Herrington, we had a suggestion come in from Bridget, who is a former retired teacher. And her proposal is that there are many retired teachers who might be willing, herself included, to come back, not back to teach. They don't need the work, but they want to help. And they'd like to be able to provide, whether it's tutoring support, or to be able to work with smaller groups to assist teachers in this distance learning format. I also know some other volunteers who've worked quite extensively with Schools of Hope and that tutoring program, which is currently on hold, who really want to help and support our teachers, our students, and the parents who are struggling to provide that extra support at home. Is that something that seems possible and we could do in Sonoma County?
I do know that there, you have to look, it gets back to visitors and campus contact. Once you bring an outside source into a situation, that has to really be evaluated as it relates to cohort exposure. Secondly, for the safety and well-being of our students, we have a fingerprinting process they would have to go through and a vetting process they would have to go through. Because
is that true also in a Zoom format?
In Zoom format, you've got to be careful as well.
Mm-hmm.
Exposure to, you're putting a young child in the presence of a stranger as far as many people are concerned. We're not challenging their honesty and integrity, but we are saying we have to go through a vetting process. And that has yet to be developed, but we're still looking at ways to vet volunteers.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Herrington. We're now going to be bringing back Superintendent Thurmond. Let's see if we're going to be going to the live feed of Superintendent Thurmond. Do we have the good superintendent on the line?
Yes, Senator. I'm ready for your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Superintendent, you have been instrumental, and I'm not just saying this because the man is on Zoom tonight, but he has been leading the way on all issues of bridging the digital divide. We literally have tens of thousands of students, and especially here in Sonoma County and all the way up to the Oregon border, that can't access broadband, nor can they access Chromebooks, for example. Can you briefly talk about your work, which has just been instrumental, what you've been able to secure in your fight for rural California and rural Sonoma County, because really you've been the lone voice out there fighting for these kids. So I'll turn it over to you, please.
Well, Senator, thank you, and thanks for your work. Senator, it's not lost on me as you're keying up this introduction about the digital divide that my internet service provider is failing me right now. I got two cell phones that I can't get either one of them to work anywhere, but yet I have options. We have 4 or 5 offices across the state. if you think about the experiences of our students, the intensity that this has really foisted on them is why we created the task force on closing the digital divide. It doesn't mean that you can't participate in distance learning if you don't have a computer, but why wouldn't we want to be in an environment where every student has a computing device and every student has high-speed internet? There have been some donations of internet that really are not up to speed for supporting the learning that our students deserve. From my standpoint, this is an embarrassment for a state with the riches that we have, the technology that we have allowed for decades for this digital divide to exist. Our students in California deserve better. And I'm grateful that you joined this task force. I created it because we realized as we moved into distance learning that we have to address the technology needs of our students so that they can excel, but that we want to go for the moonshot. We want to go beyond just beyond getting devices. We want to close the digital divide once and for all. We're big fans of CTE and grateful for what the CTE Foundation does. And that means that our students have hands-on learning, that they have access to STEAM and STEM, that they have access to practical learning. And our students need to have devices, whether they're in distance learning or even in-person instruction. They have to have devices that allow them to take advantage of all that's being offered. And I know there are a lot of bills in the legislature that are speaking to creating more infrastructure. I know that Congress is debating a number of items that would create more internet connectivity. We've been working with Congress on a new set of grants that would build infrastructure in rural parts of our state that have been without it. You've been a champion on this. Really, I hope that you all know that your senator has been holding internet service providers accountable, because many of them, quite frankly, haven't been willing to build infrastructure because they say there's not enough profit in it for them. And Senator McGuire has just said this is unacceptable. And so literally, we've been able to provide hundreds of thousands of devices to students all across the state. We've been able to secure donations to buy more devices. We have a challenge though. All the devices were actually purchased before we moved into distance learning. Many of the companies bought up all the devices for their employees, which is great, but our students have suffered as a result. And so we're working with Senator McGuire, we're working with a number of other legislators to bring forward some proposals that we think will bring more infrastructure to communities like Sonoma County, and more devices for our students. We're not going to stop until it's done. The pandemic has caused us to deal with this blemish, but we're not going to stop just in getting devices. We're not going to stop until we close the divide for all 6 million of our California students.
Thank you, Superintendent. And he has brought in Assemblymember Wood, Assemblywoman Aguiar-Curry, a lot of rural representatives in this discussion and really leading this. Thank you so much, Superintendent Thurmond, and grateful. And this is no BS to anyone on this line. He really has been that voice to be able to bridge that digital divide, especially in rural parts of the state who have been forgotten for so long. So thank you, Superintendent. Let's turn it over to Kathy Goodacre for our questions coming in from Zoom.
Yes. Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Senator, for all you've both done to help close this gap. It's critical, in particular in our rural communities here. What the question being asked now from Dan in West County is, what can we do? What can we do locally to advocate for this? We have a very generous community here in Sonoma County, and if there's somewhere that private industry and private individuals can get involved, if there's something we can do, we'd like to know what that is.
Kathy, I'm glad you said that. I dropped the ball. I meant to say that anybody who wants to get involved, we've set up a special way just to get in touch with us. It's donatech@cde.ca.gov. Again, it's donatech@cde.ca.gov. Thanks for having my back, Kathy, and not letting me drop the ball, because we're in a position where we really need to raise, at minimum, we're really looking at about $500 million for California students. And that's just really getting at computing devices and some hotspots. When you get into the infrastructure needs for California, you're really talking more like $4 billion. And there are some proposals in the legislature that would help to bring that forward. We need help from the HEROES Act, like Dr. Herrington said, and we'll probably need some other measures to help us get there. But this is critical. and we won't stop until it's done.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. We have about 5 minutes left, and we're getting to as many questions and comments as possible. We're going to turn the next question over to Superintendent Herrington. Superintendent Herrington, Sonoma County Schools Superintendent, we are getting a lot of questions tonight about metrics. And what metrics are used to be able to determine starting the school year with distance learning versus coming back to a hybrid model, some distance learning, some in classroom. Can you describe that and how these decisions are being made? Steve Herrington.
Well, first of all, the local board will make the decision on whether they're going to go distance learning. Then they want to monitor it for 1 to 2 months, most of them. And what we will be trying to do is provide them from the health side, from the county health, the metrics by which to best measure their geographic area. So what you look at is, if you look at the chart that's been in the PD, tells you the geographic area and the hospitalizations in that area. You also look at the fact that the area of it, we talked about the ability of, when you do the testing, the positivity rate. We don't want to see the positivity rate grow. We don't want to see the hospital, new cases. We'd like to see stay flat or stay within the same ballpark. And that shows you that we're controlling it within our own county. And people need to understand, and this was made very clear by the health department, that the watch list has no bearing on the schools. The schools are an essential service. The watch list is developed for the primary purpose of monitoring businesses. And because their social setting environments are entirely different than our social setting environments, which are based on a very more stringent than the commercial entity that when you go into the market or when you go into a restaurant. The schools are more stringent than those. So that's some of the variables districts have to look at. Just because we could be on the state watch list doesn't mean we wouldn't be able to open.
Right. No, thank you so much, Superintendent Herrington. I'm going to turn this next question over, coming in via Zoom on district consolidation. Is that right, Ms. Goodacre? We'll turn it over to you.
That's right. And I know this is not a short answer or short topic, but one that has been discussed and talked about for many, many years in Sonoma County with 40 individual school districts. And Kelly from West County is asking if now is the time to really look at ways to make this happen as a way to address both budget and equity issues for our students. And if there is anything that the state can do in the sense of offering incentives, because we know it's a complex process, but if you have willing districts, is there a way to incentivize our districts or to help make this more accessible for our local districts who are interested?
Kathy, I think I know who Kelly is because she's asked me that question more than once. But anyway, as it relates to consolidation, since I'm a native California, I remember when schools were incented to be consolidated. Southern California went through the Unruh Act. It was called the Unruh Bill. They were given incentives to consolidate. So the legislators could look at that as an incentive model. I know the state senator and I have talked about the fire district consolidation incentive, that's a possibility. You look at that same model. But if people want, because right now nobody has consolidated since the implementation of the local control local control funding, LCFF, for schools. The last consolidation was the City of Santa Barbara and the High School District of Santa Barbara. When we went to LCFF, they consolidated because there was no longer an advantage to staying under the old revenue limit. So for us, we would have to evaluate that intensively. But people need to know, any local jurisdiction can request a consolidation, which is the combination of two elementaries, or a unification, K through grade 12. And that would be a unification study. A political group, a school board, board of supervisors, a town council can make that request. That starts the study. But I think Tony will tell you that I think Twin Rivers is the last large consolidation, and it took almost 8 years for them to complete that consolidation from beginning to end because there were challenges along the way. So it's not an easy road, but people look to me and they say, but can't you get a better operational model because you have duplication of superintendents, you have duplication of business staff. So economy of scale is an issue, and there is a savings on that end of it. But there's also local control and my neighborhood school and my community, and that I have a sense of connectedness. So those are the issues that are basically the heart of the issue here in Sonoma County.
No, thank you, Superintendent. Very grateful for that. And a sticky issue for sure. Know that one that has to be discussed, and that many educational leaders here in Sonoma County are beginning to discuss that. We have time for a couple more questions. We're going to ask Superintendent Thurmond to look into his crystal ball here. Superintendent, let's just be candid, right? Families, they're tired. They're stressed. There's a lot of anxiety as we look at starting the next school year. We started out this evening saying we should expect at least another 12 months of some form of this pandemic until there is widespread vaccine. So 2 items. How long would you tell parents and teachers to plan for? We're saying 12 months. Would like to be able to see if you concur. And then would like to be able to touch on the issue of vaccines momentarily. But Superintendent Thurmond, in your crystal ball, what are you planning for through the California Department of Education?
Well, I would just say that this is a time for us to be thinking about the marathon and moving, you know, in inches, because we just don't know how long the impacts of the pandemic will be with us. You know, it's really a little scary right now, and we're seeing cases spike all across the state, all across the country, in ways that really, you know, really sadly undo all the great work that California had been doing to flatten the curve. California really has done great work, and here we are. In the last month, we've been watching these numbers continue to grow, and we have to pay attention to that. At the same time, I feel like there are there's the possibility for us to make some change in the right direction, and we have some control over what we do. And I know that people get frustrated by it, and they're not, you know, they feel inconvenienced by it, but right now, a lot of the science just is not settled on how this is going to go. Many experts in health are predicting that there may be a vaccine by the end of the year. Many of our partners in higher education are expecting, they're telling their students to expect that they may spend the rest of the year in a kind of remote learning. You know, we're not really saying that in K-12 education. We're saying if you choose to open and distance learning because of the conditions to be safe, it makes sense to do that. But let's continue to monitor. We know that there are places, Steve talked about, you know, 3%, you know, clearly some counties are in better positions than others in terms of safety. And we don't want to hinder those communities that are able to safely reopen. All I would ask is that they continue to maintain plenty of physical distance, and that everyone's wearing a face covering and washing hands. These are things that we can control until there's a vaccine, until we know when it's going to be safe for us. I don't want to put a timestamp on it because I just don't have the ability to do that. But by all indications, we're going to have to continue with many of these precautions for quite some time. And so I suggest that we pace ourselves, that we, as Dr. Herrington said, provide lots of personal protective equipment. And we will be working with the senator and the governor's office and the legislature to continue to help school districts with personal protective equipment. We think that's a responsibility of the state. And when the HEROES Act comes forward, we think there'll be more resources there. You know, again, I want to commend the senator and the legislature and the governor. This budget that has been passed has about $5.2 billion. That's all to deal with distance learning in some way. And so there are some resources and vision. We need more, clearly, but I think that we're positioning ourselves to be able to have the resources we need for the long haul. We just want people to be safe and well, whatever that takes. We can find a way to get through it. This is probably the toughest thing that most of us will deal with in our lifetime. And there are no easy answers. There's no clear script on how to do it. But what's clear to me is that we can do more together. We can answer those tough questions together. We can keep each other safe, and we can do more for our 6 million students together. We'll be stronger for it, and we're stronger together. And I just want to say to you, Senator, thanks for having me on tonight. And I want to wish you and the panelists and all of your constituents to continue to be safe and well.
No, thank you so much, Superintendent. We're so grateful for your hard work. And look, there is no other superintendent, and this is no joke, that has had to face this type of challenge when it comes to keeping our schools open, kids and teachers and families, along with our classified staff, safe. So we're really grateful. 30 seconds, Mr. Superintendent, Superintendent Thurmond, vaccines. Do you believe that school won't fully get back to normal until there is a widespread vaccine available here in the United States? Your thoughts?
Well, I think some of our schools districts have already demonstrated that they can open with instruction because they have low cases, and the health and science data supports that. And now that does mean that folks have to be wearing face coverings, staff and students, and that means that there needs to be plenty of physical distancing. And so we already have examples of where that can be done in Sonoma County, in Marin County, and a lot of places we're seeing this in a lot of our rural communities that have lower rates of infection, that have more open space and enough space to provide plenty of physical distancing. And so there's no one size fits all, but we do see examples of where it can happen. But by and large, our experience is one where we're having to move into distance learning. And so, Senator, I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that we can continue to provide a quality education even before there's a vaccine. It's just that our way of life has changed. I don't think any of us ever envisioned that our children would show up in school wearing a face covering and that staff would be wearing a face covering. But that's the way of the day to keep folks safe. And, you know, the governor and the Office of Emergency Services have also sent face shields because many of our students need to be able to see the expressions of their teachers. And that's an important, a function in education. All I'm saying is California is going to rise, and we'll provide whatever resources we need to make this happen safely until there's a vaccine and until the day we can return to normal, whatever that is again.
Thank you, Superintendent. Our last question of the night, we're going to turn it over to Kathy Goodacre, then we're going to go to closing statements on the issue of equity, which has been so critical. Ms. Goodacre.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate everyone's hanging in here with us and staying over a little bit of time. Because again, not a simple question or answer here, but I do know, State Superintendent, that there is some work and efforts being made on behalf of the California Department of Education in helping our schools address the social justice, racial equity issue. Do you want to share a little bit about what you're up to there?
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Like many of you, it was just devastating to see the events surrounding the killing of George Floyd, and to see a man beg for his life and to have his life taken from him was just devastating. It has lifted up so many concerns about social justice and racial justice, and so many things that we need to address, and that there's a nexus to what happens in education when you look at disproportionality in our schools, and you look at racial segregation, and you look at the impacts on African-American students and Latino students and low-income students, and it spells that we need to do more work. And so after seeing these circumstances, I've announced a new campaign of sorts, an initiative where we can really work on bias and use education in the education sector to address bias. We're building a training model to help schools talk about issues around race and racism and bias. I've heard from many teachers who say they want to help, but they're not sure how to have these conversations. And I believe that what America needs is courageous conversations about race and racism and changing bias, because we have more in common. There's more about us that we have in common than we do than what separates us. And we have differences that really are special and should be celebrated, but we do more together, and we have to figure out ways to really address those who would divide us. And I believe that most Americans really want to bring us together. I've been impressed with what I see on the television every night as I see people demanding justice, but people from all backgrounds coming together to say, let's make this country even better. This is a great country, and I want to see us make it even better. And that means addressing prejudice and hate of all kinds. And so we'll be in a position, we've received some grants that allow us to really work on building this new campaign around implicit bias training for educators, so that we can support our students. We rolled out a campaign this month to talk about ethnic studies. Many of our students have said that they want to see representations of themselves in their history books that look like them and that talk about the contributions that they and their ancestors have made to make California this great state and this great nation. And for our students who experience low self-esteem, giving them access to ethnic studies so that African American and Latino and Native American and Asian Pacific Islander students can see these great contributions that their ancestors have made, but really it's for the good of Californians of all backgrounds. And so we're leaning in, Kathy. It's hard conversations, but we're leaning in. Many of our superintendents have said they want to work with us. I'm grateful to Dr. Herrington and others who've advised us on how to start rolling this out. And again, I really believe that we're stronger together and we'll do more together. And that includes how we address issues around race and racism in this state and in this country.
Thank you, Superintendent. That's so inspiring, and it's really great to hear. We look forward to working with you locally.
Thank you.
Mike, should we wrap this up?
Yeah, 100%, Kathy. Just want to take a moment to say thank you to each and every one of you who've been hanging with us now, going on for about an hour and a half, both on Facebook Live as well as right here on Zoom. We had over 1,000 participants tonight, and we couldn't be more grateful. The CTE Foundation will be providing this entire broadcast to individuals who want it in the coming days. And I want to take a moment to say thank you to Kathy Goodacre and Leslie Simmons with the CTE Foundation. They have been putting in a lot of the work to be able to pull this event off tonight, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. Thank you so much, Kathy, as well as Cradle to Career Sonoma County as well, for all of your hard work. We'd like to be able to provide closing comments to each of the leaders who are on with us. Let's start with Mr. Thurmond. And again, Mr. Thurmond, we are so grateful for your leadership, especially in these challenging times. Closing comments, last word, sir.
Senator, I just want to thank you for putting this event tonight. This is the most important topic, I think, anywhere. Our kids really are our future, and we're all concerned about their safety and their well-being. And, you know, there are many debates raging in this state and in this country. But one thing we should never politicize is our children, and we should find ways to do what's best for them and to keep them safe. I appreciate you for having this panel and giving me the opportunity to be with great leaders like Dr. Herrington and Kathy Goodacre, and just really hearing all these tough questions, because these are the questions that we have to answer to continue to provide quality learning for our students and to ensure that they're safe. Senator, I'm grateful for the 4 years that we served together in the legislature. You never shy away from taking on tough bills that address the quality of life. You have a tremendous, tremendously large district to cover, and you make constituent services a hallmark of what you do. I've enjoyed watching the way you work. I've enjoyed that we've had more time to work together on the task force on closing the digital divide. I'm in your service and in the service of your constituents and ready to help in any way that we can, and just want to bid you and your constituents to continue to be safe and well. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you so much. We have a friend in Superintendent Thurmond. I got to tell you, no one works harder on behalf of our kids, and we greatly appreciate your hard work, sir. Thank you for your partnership this evening. And I know how much you have going on right now, and you taking the time tonight means so much to all of us and to over 1,000 folks who joined us tonight. So thank you, Superintendent. And we're getting a lot of great comments about your blunt feedback here this evening. So thank you. We'd like to be able to turn it over to Steve Herrington, County Superintendent of Schools here in Sonoma County. Closing comments, please.
Yes, I would also like to thank Kathy for all the hard work she puts in at the CTE Foundation. And Mike, your support for our bills and initiatives that we've pushed through at the local level. And for Tony, who, when brand new, just after he took office, came out and supported us after the Kincaid fire to meet with our superintendents. So I really appreciate that. I've given him one of our initiation prizes, the new superintendent. There's a button that I give every new superintendent. It says, it's the superintendent's fault. No matter what you do, you're gonna have to make a decision and somebody won't be happy with it. But more seriously, I wanna talk to the community and tell them that every school board member makes the decision about opening school and the model they choose. They are taking it seriously and with great concern about the well-being and welfare of students. They don't take it carelessly or callously. They make it consciously. based on the needs of the community. There's a great need for schools to have in-face instruction. There's a variety of ways that can be accomplished. Distance learning, the parameters that were set out under SB 98 sort of define how that can best be accomplished. So I hope the community is not assuming that distance learning is last year's model. It is not. It is now newly defined and enhanced based on that sudden experience. But once again, I want to thank the 38 superintendents who are working hard with their communities. And I want to thank the community partners who are making their school plans. And then once again, be engaged as a community, support your local school district.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. We are so appreciative of your hard work. You've been with us through thick and thin when it comes to all the fires and the floods and now this pandemic. We are grateful for your partnership and your leadership here in this county. Before I turn it back over to Kathy Goodacre, just want to take a moment again to say thank you to the CTE Foundation for their leadership in bringing us together. I know this will be the first of a few that they'll be hosting, and want to say how much we appreciate them convening these important conversations, and especially now as we look to reopen schools. We want to take a moment to also say thank you to the thousands of teachers and classified staff who call the North Bay home. They are on the front lines educating our kids day in and day out through these challenging times. And let's be honest, it's not easy for them. They have childcare, they're feeding kids morning, noon, and night of their own, and then coming to school and doing the same. We owe them a debt of gratitude. To all the certificated and to the classified staff, thank you. Administrators and school board members, thank you so much. And I'll just end it right here, way the superintendent ended his. The #1 priority in this state has to be our kids in public schools. And know how frustrating it is that we're in a time in our lives where there are gray answers. But I promise you, we are working. It's all of us together to try to get you straight answers to this pandemic. And while we are going to have some gray area moving forward, you have our commitment that we're going to work together and we're going to put the priority of your kids first. And it is so critical. And I want to say thank you again, Kathy, for bringing us together. I'll turn it over to you to be able to close this out. And please thank your board as well.
You bet. Thank you, Senator, again, and your team for helping us pull this off. And State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, nice to meet you virtually, and welcome, and so grateful to have you be here in Sonoma County. And Dr. Herrington, as always, great partnership, great leader, advocate on behalf of our kids in schools. We have on the screen here, I just want to share this. These are resources that we have gathered, other websites, resources for parents and educators, more information. We're also going to get that Donate Tech at CDE. I'm a fundraiser, Superintendent Thurmond, so absolutely going to get some information out about that in terms of how local folks can help support getting those digital devices to our students. One more recognition I want to make, and that's with Betsy Chavez with the Hannah Institute, who was conducting the Spanish translation version of this broadcast. And we will be doing follow-up with folks. We had hundreds of questions, literally, that we couldn't get to, but as I said in the beginning, this will be really helpful for us as we look to launch additional and future series on important topics around education and facing our kids and families in Sonoma County. So with that, I think that's a wrap. Thank you all again, and thank you everyone for joining in, and have a great evening. Good night.